Teachers of Reddit. How easy it to tell if a student has a crush on another? And what is the funniest, saddest moment between the two you can share? Story 1. My son, who is 5, has a crush on a 6-year-old at his school. She says she loves him too and she is around him all the time. He told me just yesterday that he wants to build a 3-bedroom house with a room for him, a room for her, and a room for the baby they are going to have. I asked if he did not want to share a bedroom with her, and he said a boy needs his space. Story 2. Former 6th grade teacher here. I was there to witness one of my kids take his first big leap. At lunch, he asked the girl he had a crush on, "Will you go on a date with me?" She smiled and said yes. Immediately, the boy on the other side of her said, "Don't go out with this, go out with me." She smiled and said, "Okay." Middle school is tough, man. Story 3. This is one of my most treasured memories as a teacher. I was a student teacher, so I was not prepared for this. I asked my students to write and share their own poetry. We focused on sensory imagery, and I had the presentation staged at the local university for a bit more gravitas. Some were funny, some were surprisingly beautiful, but most were banal, and the exercise was mostly boring. This one girl got up in front of the class visibly shaking. She was near tears for her entire poem. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea what to do, so I just watched like everyone else as she poured her heart out to a boy in the class who did not reciprocate. When she finished, there was a silence in the room, and after a few seconds which seemed to stretch out forever, one of her friends stood up and ushered her out of class as the tears began to flow. Nobody made fun of her, but the boy also didn't show that he felt the same. It was just out there with no commentary. It is to this day one of the bravest acts I have ever witnessed. Story 4. I teach preschool. They tend to lack any sort of filter, so they'll just say it outright. Sometimes to me, sometimes to their crush. "Matthew is my boyfriend." Or, "Let's get married, Julia." They will also occasionally try to kiss their crush. Today, one of my students, Gavin, kissed my hand and proposed. He's 4. It was adorable. I almost wish adult men were as upfront, although I think I'd be a bit freaked out with a proposal. Story 5. I teach 10th graders. When I was student teaching at age 21, I was really well liked, and the students told me a lot of personal stuff, probably because my age made me more approachable to 15, 16-year-olds. One girl, C, would spend her study hall in my classroom during my planning period, along with about 5 other students who just wanted to get out of study hall. She told me that she liked a boy, S, who also hung out in my classroom at that time. From then on, I used to group them together in class on purpose to get her to talk to him and give them an opportunity to spend some time together. I would always encourage her to ask him to hang out or tell her about things he was interested in, so she could start conversations with him about it. She loved him. I think he saw her as a friend but was generally clueless about her feelings. The saddest moment between the two of them was during my planning period, their study hall. Some of the other kids that hung out in my room during that time were off running errands for me, so it was just CS and I in the classroom. C was a pretty overweight girl, and she was sitting on the desk part of those dumb classroom desks, and the desk completely gave out, breaking and sending her falling to the ground. I immediately shooed S out of the room, sending him to get the maintenance guy to get the desk out. When S was gone, C started bawling and was absolutely mortified. I knew she would be, which is why I sent S away quickly. I talked her through her embarrassment, and by the time S got back, C was cool as a fucking cucumber and totally brushed it off. We went back to normal conversation, and I'm sure S forgot about it within minutes. My student teaching ended about a month later, so I'm not sure if anything became of C and S, but I definitely still think about them sometimes. Edit. Wow. Thanks, guys, for the kind words and the gold. I kind of expected this to get buried, haha. Anyway, I'd like to think I was just doing what any teacher would do in that situation, but I know that there is an unfortunate number of teachers who wouldn't have responded the same way I did. I just remember what it was like to be 15 years old. And I've had a few teachers who treated me as kindly as I treated C, so I'm just paying it forward and doing my job. Story 6. I have this one teacher that will totally just say anything that's on her mind. One, she just flat out said, "Do you guys like each other or what?" to these 2 kids in my class. Within 3 days, they were dating and still are. Story 7. It is painfully obvious most of the time. Here are some of the things I saw. Continuous glances at the same person. Body language that positions the person closer to the other person, interjecting into a conversation that the person was not engaged in to begin with. Being helpful, more so for a person than for anyone else in class. Flirting, obviously. Boastful storytelling. A lot of times it is outlandish and very obviously untrue. Hanging around the other person uninvited. And checking out the other person while oblivious to their surroundings. What is funny is that most people think they are being sneaky or inconspicuous. From my vantage point in the front of the classroom, these things seemed so obvious as to be genuinely painful to observe. It was especially painful when the feelings were intentionally unreciprocated. I taught college for a bit. Edit. Formatting was wonky. Edit 2. I said vintage. It should have been vantage, but the wine reference below was just too good to change my post. Story 8. I work in a college and teach early morning classes to 17 to 24-year-olds, mostly. It is painfully obvious who just did a walk of shame to class and occasionally who is fucking someone else in the room. The most awkward thing that ever happened was some guy who came into the class and interrupted a lecture to hit on a girl in the front row. He wasn't even a student, just some who walked by our open campus and recognized the girl through the window as the girl who he saw at Jack in the Box a week earlier. Edit. More details on the second story. He comes in and just starts talking to her. I am in such shock that this guy just randomly walked in. I was speechless and just stood there watching it. After about a minute, I came to my senses and realized the situation. Here is this 40-plus-year-old dude, tatted up with his pants hanging from his, reeking of booze and cigarettes at 9 a.m., hitting on a very uncomfortable-looking tiny blonde 18-year-old. I tell him that this is my classroom and that I wouldn't have him interrupting. He would have to go. He didn't put up a fight, just asked when class was over so he could come back to mack him some. I told him we were out at noon. We were really done by 10, and that was the last day of class. The day of the final, a week later, in a different room. I kept my eyes open, but he never showed. I asked the student, but she only knew him from a single instance of standing in line in front of him at Jack in the Box. Story 9. Oh man, the longing stares across the room. The almost creepy, wistful what-ifs you can just see in their eyes. When I was in middle school, that was me. Story 10. Teenagers are not subtle by nature, but they are amazingly oblivious when it comes to matters of the heart. They are really perceptive with other things, though. The boys almost never recognize if a girl likes them, and the girls never realize a guy is showing interest. It's funny to watch it happen. It's so blatantly obvious as an outsider, but I remember being just as oblivious as a student. Story 11. I'm a substitute teacher, and my favorite student with a blatant crush experience was with a second-grade class. I picked the kids up from the yard after recess, and a boy came to me very upset because one of the girls had been chasing him the entire recess. Once we got back to class, I talked with the girl, asking for her side of the story. Conversation went something like this. Me. Jose was pretty upset about something that happened this recess. Do you want to tell me what happened? Girl. We were playing. Me. He said you were chasing him, is that true? Girl. Slight blush. Yeah. Me. Do you think he wanted you to be chasing him? Girl. No. Me. If you knew he didn't want to be chased, why were you chasing him? Girl. Huge blush, guilty smile, and hunched shoulders. He makes me laugh. Story 12. High school teacher. Depending on the kids' personalities, they either get louder or quieter when their crushes are present. The loud ones are freaking annoying. The quiet ones are the ones I would purposefully sit next to their crushes, haha. Story 13. Computer Science Chalk Computational Physics University lecturer here. Men tend to outnumber women. 10-1 http AKI imgur. Com abtpfv gif. In my lecture groups. This has resulted in some odd scenarios, my favorite being 4 of my students simultaneously being exceedingly into the same exceedingly pretty woman who was in the realms of shy but unremittingly kind. She also happened to be a lesbian. I knew this, they did not. Of course, only 2 people could sit next to her in a lecture theater, and an actual friend of hers usually took one of those spots. So the 4 of them would try to play it cool as she sat down, then desperately try to get as close as possible without giving the game away. Like a single round of musical chairs where only one person can win, but there's definitely never going to be a prize any of the players want. It's important to also be aware that these were nerds of the highest order, so at a certain point they were just running and shoving one another, charging down the aisle like the adults they apparently were. I was eventually forced to intervene and end the game when one of them, honest to God, vaulted a row of seats and nearly landed on another student. They deliberately avoided her after I pulled them aside, which was probably great for her, but terrible for me. I found their fruitless game a never-ending source of comedy. Story 14. Awkward story. My students are all between 8 and 10, and a few have noticeably hit the point where they are obviously starting to notice the opposite. I have two students that I'll give fake names, a boy, James, and a girl, Lucy, in my class. They are always together. Recess, lunchtime, free choice. The two are always working together. They are both very shy and giggly, and it seemed a mutual crush was there, noted by me and their math teacher as well. One day, I hear James getting teased by some other kids for his crush on Lucy. His math teacher and I pull him aside and have a talk with him. We tell him that we'll be talking with the class as a whole about crushes and teasing. He's not the only one. His math teacher also tells him that if he does have a crush on Lucy, it's nothing to be embarrassed about because she's a nice, sweet girl. James just looks awkward and asks to go, so we let him. A few days later, I'm walking my kids out to the parent pickup, and I see Lucy's dad is here to pick her up. James waves to both of them as they leave, and I ask if he's been over to Lucy's house to play and if he knows her dad. "Yay, miss. That's my uncle." "Oh, shit. I have encouraged cousin incest." I awkwardly gather my nerves and start to say, "Ah, you remember that talk we had about Lucy and liking her? Ah, well, I didn't realize she was your cousin, so—" "I thought you didn't. That was weird, miss." Then he just laughed and said he liked a different girl anyway from his older sister's class. Edit for formatting. Claude Dr. 10-year-old is into cougars, not cousins. Story 15. Miguel asked me, the AP Chem teacher, if he could write a message on the board for Mariela. Miguel was a former AP student, and at that time a senior. Mariela was a current AP student and at the time a junior. Miguel, using elements from the periodic table, asked Mariela to go to the senior banquet, the biggest to-do at our school, and then Miguel asked if I would record it on my phone while he asks her. I said sure thing, and I was glad to help. Both were great people and good students. Miguel, during class, goes into this big long show asking Mariela. After he's done, Mariela stands up, looks straight at the phone and says, "No." She then sat back down. Before this started, I thought there was no way Miguel would endure public humiliation unless he knew for sure Mariela would say yes. As soon as she said no, there was nothing but silence. Miguel literally dropped his head and slinked out of the room. Mariela didn't flinch. I die laughing every time I watch that video. Greatest moment of my teaching career. Edit. There have been numerous requests for the video. Unfortunately, I can't upload the video because they are minors, and it would be posted without any permission. Believe me, I weighed the value of funny v legal and funny near one. But in the end, I do enjoy teaching, so I would like to keep my job. Sorry. Story 16. I wasn't a teacher. I was a teaching helper. I mean, it was only 6th grade, but it was extremely easy. Looking at everyone facing you, you start to realize what people are focusing on. I know when kids are texting because they look straight at me, and every 2 minutes look down for 2 seconds and have their hands under the table. For a crush, it is the long stares at the back of their crush's head whilst fiddling with an object like a pencil or their hair. The quick look away when the crush looks at them. It's easy. Sorry for question mark at first, im German, and didn't know how to teaching helper correctly to say it. If anyone knows, please comment or message me. Story 17. Band in high school is a funny place. Since kids are around each other a lot more of the time than the average student, they tend to get band goggles. It's pretty obvious to see relationships blossoming. More often than not, it is a good thing, but every now and then you get the older upperclassmen boys going after naive freshman girls. And boy oh boy does it turn ugly quick. The drama can be outrageous. Funniest. Most shocking moment. A girl who is an awesome student has been dating a true player on and off for the last year. She went so far to tell me that she got back together with him after he cheated on her. So literally last Friday, I'm sitting in the band hall watching kids practice. This sweet girl comes in the hall and is walking with a sense of purpose. As she passes me, she says something under her breath that I didn't quite get the first time. Confused by what she said, I watch her walk up to said guy. She grabs him by the shoulders and spins him around. She says something to which he responds with a short answer, but had that look on his face that he got caught doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. She then up her fist and socks the guy 4 or 5 times and storms off. At that point, I realized what she said. SC Vanguard, you are going to have to write me an office referral. Best referral ever. Edit. Clarification. Edit 2. ITT former and current promiscuous band nerds, which I hope are not my students. Story 18. Teacher of high school freshman here. It's very easy. Saddest story? Two houses, both alike. Sorry. It was a couple years ago. Girl was quiet, charming, and very bright. Boy was disruptive, but the good kind of disruptive. The pleasure to have in class disruptive. Very funny. It became very clear to me that she was crushing on him something fierce. I, for what it was worth, blessed this potential union. This went on for several months. Then, one day, she storms into my room in a huff, declaring her anger at him. As I'm going around the room later that day, I catch him writing a lengthy letter to her. At a glance, it explained how he thought she was a really nice girl and all, but it would be perhaps best if they remained only friends. I assumed she had made a move. It didn't pay off. Over the next few days, I saw more mournful and longing looks than I ever wanted. Each one broke my heart. By the end of the year, they had patched it up. Yet, I still caught the occasional twinge of sadness in her eye. She may still hope to this day. And I still hope too. Story. 19 daycare teacher to kids, 6'11" here. It is probably one of the easiest things to pick up on. They try to play with the other, but they don't openly admit to it. They spend a lot of time near the other without ever actually talking to them. They sit at the same table but try to talk to different friends. Basically, they spend as much time with the other as possible without actually becoming friends. If anything about crushes is mentioned, they immediately try to direct the conversation so people talk about them and their crush. And the second the two are mentioned together, the crusher blushes. Not to brag, but I have this 10-year-old that has a pretty obvious crush on me. I mean, I'm a teenage male who spends 20 hours a week with her, so it is entirely understandable. I should mention that I don't encourage it or anything. I treat her like all the others. Granted, she is one of the oldest, so she does have more responsibility, and she is able to have deeper conversations. But she tries to make my life easy. She will help clean, cook, and take care of the younger kids. She does it to impress me, and I sincerely appreciate it. I will say again that it is completely normal. I had crushes on babysitters, so do we all. I feel kind of bad for her now, because she puts a lot into it, but I know she'll smile looking back on it as an adult. There is another kid who is 6, maybe 7 now, who has a crush on one of the 9-year-olds. I mean, they are not entirely on the same level mentally. First grade and third grade are about as far apart as third grade and ninth grade. Night and day. So it is kind of sad because he is chasing after her. She knows, I think, about the crush, and it makes her a little uncomfortable, but she is sweet about it. Story 20. I'm not a teacher, but in 6th grade, 2002, a girl in my class, history with Mrs. Thompson, sat in the next row over from me every day. I was crushing on another girl and ignorant to the fact that she liked me. Midwinter, Mrs. Thompson is handing back papers and stops between the two of us while glancing back and forth between the two of us, and says something along the lines of, I don't know who to give this paper back to, her first name, or Mr., my last name. Mrs. Thompson hands the paper back to her. She had been practicing writing her name with my last name so much in her notebook, apparently like many teenage girls do, that she had accidentally written it on homework she handed in. 6 years later at my high school graduation, a half dozen of my former teachers, including Mrs. Thompson, were sitting around talking with my friends and me and brought up that paper where a girl had written my last name on her paper. They found it cute and endearing and told other various stories of middle school love. A year and a half ago, I married that girl. TLDR. My wife is omniscient. Don't tell her I said that. Story 21. 8th grade teacher here. That's right. The year hormones go absolutely haywire, but sometimes in cute way. I teach a literacy block, and part of that time is spent silently reading while I do one-on-one reading conferences with the kids. During this time, kids can move about the room, so to speak. I have double-sized room with a couple of couches and a ton of pillows, and 2 particular students sat next to each other. These students are dating. Anyway, about 5 minutes into our sustained silent reading, it was absolutely still and silent. One of those students, boy, suddenly stood up and repositioned himself on the opposite side of his girlfriend. I noticed but didn't say a word and continued my reading conference. A few minutes later, I snuck a peek and he had reached over to clasp her left hand in his. They stayed like that for the rest of the time, both reading. She's reading The Fault in Our Stars, and he's reading The Name of the Wind. Their reading tastes are part of why I love them so. P.S. He had to change sides to hold her hand because she was born without a right arm. Amniotic band syndrome, I think. I know, right? Edited to add to all the comments asking, how did she hold the book with one hand? Have you never read a book with, like, say, a soda in your hand? Or a Kit Kat? Come on. Plus, she's been compensating her whole life, 13 years, for the missing limb. FYI, she is beyond brilliant, completely joyful, and is the most fabulously confident girl I've ever taught. Edited again for you logic-minded folks that are still twisting over this. Okay, picture them. They are sitting on the floor, leaning against some pillows, side by side, backs to a wall. Her left hand is in his right hand. She has her legs bent. Another pillow is propping up her book. Hardcover. Stays open by itself on her lap. As needed, she raises up their paired hands to turn the page. He does the same. The book is in her lap, folks. Her lap. I do understand your initial confusion, though. I do. Story 22. I am teaching 7th grade right now. It's crazy easy to tell. It makes me wonder if I was that obvious when I was their age, or worse, if there were girls that were that obvious towards me and I didn't notice. It's like, they don't even hide it. One of my boys carries a girl's books every day. It is clear to me that he has a crush on her. I learned recently that she has a different one of these guys to carry her books between every class. I mean, that's just manipulative. She's got to know, right? Right? Story 23. Well, I think it's safe to say that you've asked a great question. Not a single answer yet, and we've still reached 32 upvotes. Edit. Shit's popping off now. Yay! Story 24. In high school, I sat behind a girl in math class, and every time she would bend over to get something from her bag, pick up her pen, etc., which was often, I would stare heartily at her thong. I'm quite positive the teacher saw me ogling. I wasn't exactly being discreet. Wait a minute. Was that girl doing that on purpose? Story 25. One of my students' father told me his son liked a girl in his kinder class. He said, "She's pretty, Dad. She looks like a dragon." The dad laughed and said, "We're going to have to work on your compliments, son." Story 26. I teach English. I remember a star football player, senior, coming into the room to rap with me for a bit before third period started every Friday. In my third period, a female student, junior, of mine who was extremely intelligent and very pretty, yet somewhat shy being an AP student and all, was sitting in the front row and always stared at him when he came in. He would talk about football and stuff with me, and every so often I'd look back at her still staring right at him and smiling the entire time. She would not turn that smile off no matter who was looking or what anyone said. It was actually one of the cutest, saddest things I ever saw, seeing as how the guy never even turned around to notice her. If he did. Who knows, maybe they would have hit it off. Maybe they did after they weren't my students. Story 27. A couple met in my HS chemistry classroom. This was 3 years ago. He was a junior in HS, she was a sophomore. They told me last fall that when the date is set, I'll be invited to the wedding. Best example of chemistry ever. Story 28. It's incredibly easy for me to tell, and after I know I make it a point to sit the kids next to each other if I think they'll make a cute couple, produce adorable offspring in the future. The world needs more cute couples, kids. You're welcome. Story 29. I teach kids how to swim, and it's so adorably obvious. The girls will talk to the boys all cutesy, and the guys will be like, yeah, and look off into the distance. The cutest is when the 3 or 4-year-old boys have crushes on you, and they can be pretty sly. Sometimes they'll jump off the wall knowing you have to catch them, and they'll try to kiss you, or they won't think I feel their hand on my when we're kicking. But I feel it. That's why we use kickboards now. It's a huge confidence boost. Story 30. I teach kindergarten. Yes, they get crushes too. They're completely incapable of hiding them because they haven't yet learned shame. I had a class with 6 girls and only 1 boy. One of the girls always played with the boy. Their moms are good friends, so they also do many things together outside of school. At lunch, the girl would talk about how many times she had kissed the boy at soccer practice and how they were going to get married. It was absolutely adorable. Then, one day, I got a new student. Another boy. I can't even tell you how excited my first little guy was to finally have another boy to play with. He expected the new boy would feel the same way and immediately want to be his best friend. Unfortunately for him, the new boy wanted to be friends with everyone, including the girls. Not only did my original boy have to share his new friend, but his little girlfriend started flirting hardcore with the new boy and forgot about him almost completely. He started getting madder and madder. I had to work very hard during playtime to make sure he didn't feel left out. It was a very hard time for him. Luckily, the new boy was only around for a short time. Everything went back to normal when he left. Story 31. In my high school, there was the rumor that the teachers would talk in their break room and try to pair people up in their classes for prom. They didn't do jack for me, so them. Story 32, I'll start. I was a kid once and had crush on my teacher once crush and oh she knew. I stayed after class and wore short shirts. Joke. I told her I was retarded and needed the extra help. But she didn't bite unfortunate. I'm autistic. Edit 2. Keep the upvotes coming, like I was for teacher edit. PMs or bust. Story 33. I worked in a kindergarten for a brief period between high school and uni, and there were a couple of little 5-year-old girls who just walked up to the boys. They decided they liked and kissed them forcefully, informing them they were now their husbands. But the one that sticks to mind is the little 2-year-old from my group. She spoke only a little at the time and didn't bother much with learning the names of the grown-ups to any extent, but shortly before I left they hired a really young guy, about 19, as an assistant. The girl sees him walking into the ward for the first time and just freezes. She actually dropped her toy, and her eyes go round like saucers, her jaw dropping. It was both adorable and absolutely hilarious to watch. We introduced him and none of the kids were that fussed, but she just stood there, mouthing his name, whispering it to herself a few times to make sure she got it right. He sat down on the playmat with her, and she couldn't take her eyes off him. She offered him a toy which he accepted gracefully, and I swear she lost her breath. From then on, she loved him. She was quite shy to begin with, walking up to him at times, saying his name, and then when she got his attention, she would giggle uncontrollably, blushing bright red and run away. If he took sick days or didn't come in till late, she would get sort of depressed and not want to play much. All the kids played favorites with the assistants, little boys have their crushes and so on, but this one was a little different. It was as if she had decided he was her soulmate. He was so kind to her, and the kind of relationship they had was never anything that made you think anything creepy. He just couldn't bear to reject her. In the afternoons, he'd read to the kids for as long as they were willing to sit still and listen, and she always made sure to be the one to sit on his lap or next to him to flip the pages. Edit. Someone gave me gold? Oh, dude. Aw. Story 34. This actually happened in my acting class just today. Our teacher said he had an exercise to show us how much subtext there is under the surface of our actions. Pick a person in here who you have something you desperately want to say something to and never could. Think about it really hard, and don't make eye contact with them, or they'll know. Everyone in the class knows each other very well. There is a lot of dirt to stir up. The silence was deep and uncomfortable. Now, go ahead and say it. You could hear the assholes pucker. People looked numb with fear and hesitation. The teacher, having proved his point about rich subtext, opened his mouth to end the exercise before anyone could actually speak. Now! Just then, a kid jumped up from his chair arduously and let loose with, "Sadie, you're hot as hell, and I want to fuck your brains out." The room exploded. Edit. The end of the story. The result was pandemonium. One kid was laughing so hard he nearly tipped his desk right over onto the floor. The teacher was in shock. The kid was red in the face and laughing uneasily. The amazing thing was the girl. She didn't smile, didn't acknowledge it. Nothing. She sat there, stock still, like Marie Antoinette at the guillotine, totally above the situation. I think she must have been mortified and didn't know what to do. The teacher's response. I have been doing that exercise for decades, and no one has ever actually said anything. Edit. The next day. You not Reddit, saw this kid and Sadie walk in today, a little apart, both grinning. He was listening to a song on her iPod. They both fell asleep in class. Great success. Story 35. In class on Sunday, a 5-year-old boy said to a girl, "Kylie, your eyes match the flower in your hair." One of the cutest things I've ever heard. She smiled and blushed, and the guy next to me looked at me and said, "That kid has got moves." Story 36. It's usually obvious. What's even more obvious is cheating. I am convinced that people only get away with cheating when teachers don't give a, because wow, it is so easy to spot from the front of the classroom. Story 37. Elementary PE teacher here. During games, students will constantly tattle on their crushes. Coach, Jenny keeps cheating. I keep tagging her and she won't get out. 1 minute later, Coach, Jenny won't share. 1 minute later, Coach, Jenny won't let me play with them. 1 minute later, Matthew, do you like Jenny? Stares at me with that just got found out look and replies, No? Oh, Coach, that's gross. You're gross. She's gross. Story 38. This seems like the right story to share for this question. My older brother and his crush were both involved in theater productions in high school. On the first production they were involved in, their characters shared a kissing scene. It was high school, so it was a pretty big deal that they had to kiss. Cue lots of teasing, flirting, etc. However, nothing came of it. For an entire year. The next year, they were both involved in the production again, building the set. The drama teacher saw them every day flirting and becoming quite good friends, but never taking that extra step to become official. So she set them up on a surprise date. She told them she was taking the set design crew out for dinner, met them at the restaurant, then said, Well, no one else showed up, and I've got other places to be. Here's some cash, have a great night. And left the restaurant. So my brother and his crush finally had their first date. And now they are married. Story 39. Story time. I had a massive crush on this girl in 9th grade. Like, head over heels in love. My 14-year-old brain was convinced that this girl and I were going to get married one day. I'd walk with her to all of her classes, I'd write her stupid little love notes, and I'd occasionally hang out with her at her house. We had one class together, biology, and it was evident by my grade in the class how much I was distracted by her. I spent most of the class relentlessly flirting with her. About halfway through the term, my biology teacher kicks me out of the class for what seems like the dozenth time for being distracting, i.e. flirting it up. As I was accustomed to this, I gathered my things and gave a sly smirk of affection towards said crush as I walked towards the door to the hallway. I sat down crisscrossed, thinking about how much my crush would like me now that I had been kicked out again for flirting with her. Right as I began fantasizing, my biology teacher suddenly appeared over me. I stood up immediately, and she looked me directly in the eyes and said, It's very obvious that you like her, so why don't you stop being a chicken and ask her out? I stood there with an aghast expression on my face, unsure of what to do or say. I finally mumbled out, Sure thing, and she invited me back into the class. So yes, teachers probably do know, especially if you're head over heels. Story 40. IT teacher 9th to 12th grades here. The students as my school all have computers provided by the school through a one-to-one sort of program, and it is managed through our domain. I see a lot of IMs through Google Talk and other programs on Dino regarding that subject before I block their ability to communicate with each other during class. I also have students who tend to just tell me these things for reasons unknown. Maybe because I am a younger teacher, they feel comfortable telling me stuff. Story 41. I've taught many different age levels and their crushes are all pretty obvious. My favorites, kindergarten boy throwing himself on floor with glee. I don't know what's going on with these girls, but I love it. 5th grader matter-of-factly saying, Listen, I have a crush on Connor, so if you could move my desk by his, I would appreciate that. And one of my students using lunch on a field trip to ask a girl on a pizza date. She accepted, and he wore extra nice clothes. They sat at their own table, making conversation in their own world. All of the adult women chaperones were very impressed.